I've collected my thoughts on the firearm debate sparked by yet another rash of disturbing violence in New York and Texas in May of 2022. But by the time I finished this thought experiment, I concluded that the issue is much bigger than these atrocities, if you can believe it. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
We know more than ever before, but who knew bias was the bane of all you study? We know more than ever before, but who knew bias was the bane of all you study?
Here in a moment, I'm going to reference a passage of scripture from the Holy Bible. For anyone not new to the channel, that warrants some explaining before I get to the point. See, I used to have a conviction that the Bible was the inerrant word of God. Now, I no longer do, and elements of my spiritual journey and things that I think now that everyone should know about the origins of Christianity, they're detailed in a 6-part series here on this channel, links down below. Anyway, nowadays I concede and accept that the collection of works that make up the Bible, especially the New Testament, are works representative of their authors and the time in which they lived. The works of the New Testament had specific audiences and were written with specific goals in mind, also rooted in their time. Having said all that, though, I accept the Old Testament axiom that there's nothing new under the sun, Ecclesiastes, especially when it comes to humanity, because we will always have more in common with each other than differences. Ancient writings are just people working out how to relate to each other based on their observable world. So because of this, I have accepted that the lessons from ancient sources, like the Bible, can also be a possible way to understanding what's going on now. Not because these works were written as prophecies for us to apply literally, but because they concern themselves with what is common to people. So, here we go. Starting off, I give you the Apostle Paul, in his believed to be authentic letter to the Galatians, chapter 6, verse 7, he says, "Do not be deceived, God will not be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." A man, or woman, or human, or family, or corporation, or city, or church, or country will reap what they sow. Now, the thrust of that scripture, of course, is the issue of the reaping and the sowing. But I'm struck by the fact that this little snippet actually includes 2 warnings. The first is not to be deceived. Don't believe a lie. In the context of this passage, the lie is that we don't reap what we have sown. I accept Galatians 6:7 as a cosmic truth, not my truth, but a cosmic truth. It was true before I got here. It's true now, and it'll continue to be true after we're all gone. Here's another quote from Jiddu Krishnamurti. "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." And with that, I have a declaration. I'm less interested in addressing negative outcomes directly, the metaphorical stopping of the bleeding and dressing of wounds. I'm almost 50, and well more than half of my life is gone, if the statistics would be applied to me anyway. Therefore, with the rest of my life, effort, money, vote, I only want to address the causes of these outcomes. There are several narratives in our culture that this neuroatypical outcome of firearm violence can be handled at the symptom stage. This is an article detailing a Michigan lawsuit where victims and or their families are suing a school district. They claim that administrators failed to act on the signs of neuroatypical behavior of an accused bad actor leading up to an incident. This situation seems to suggest that people have accepted that we are to dance this dance of having law enforcement mine Facebook accounts for manifestos and act accordingly. So our 21st century reality is that we are going to attempt to address these horrible outcomes just months, days, or even hours before the assailant makes their final decision? I interpret this as nothing other than the adjustment to a profoundly sick culture. Choosing to believe that we, as a society, can stop these inhumane events at the manifestation of the symptom is to be deceived, like the Galatian passage warns. Rational viewer, I submit that if an assailant is 24 years old, 21 years old, 18 years old, that incident was 18 years in the making, possibly even longer. I will not be deceived. A culture reaps what it sows. American culture is reaping now what it has sown in the past. To extend this metaphor from the New Testament, and credit to my older brother on this, there are two other aspects about farming that I think also apply. The first is that you usually get an abundance. A lot of things grow out of a small number of seeds. The second is that the harvest doesn't happen right away. If American culture is full of greedy, materialistic, hateful, uncaring, and irresponsible adult children, it's because it was allowed to be so. And I don't want to hear about blame anymore. There are two kinds of people concerning this: the perpetrators and the ones that allowed it to happen. And some of us are the same people. The only people who are not guilty of this are, of course, children. And it is no measure of health, no measure of good health, to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I want to talk about Latarian Milton. Because of his infamy, you may have heard of Latarian Milton. If you've never heard of Latarian Milton, you may be familiar with an on-the-nose parody of some events in his young life portrayed by Aaron McGruder's The Boondocks, a political cartoon that aired on Comedy Central. Let's take a look at Milton's timeline. Latarian Milton was born in the year 2000. At the time, his mother was 16 years old. He lived in his grandmother's house along with his mother, and I couldn't find any information on his father. 2008. The joyride in his grandmother's car. Latarian was 7 years old when he took the action that made him famous. The joyride in his grandmother's SUV was the incident that was parodied in The Boondocks. In fact, the name of the Boondocks episode was called Smoking with Cigarettes, inspired by a quote from the child himself in an interview. Outside of the sensational nature of the joyride and the look into his thought process that the local news interview revealed, there were several red flag questions that sprung to my mind for me back then. Where are his parents? His grandmother seemed to be responsible for him, and his father was never mentioned. He also had a weight problem at 7 years old. It was clear that Latarian, at least in terms of being an American citizen, had been given a start in life that, statistically, would not end up serving him well. And honestly, that's really the point of this video. Just watching this news broadcast, you know that things are not going to end well for this individual. And if we did find out that this Latarian Milton ended up leading a life as a productive citizen, we would have been surprised. 2 weeks after the joyride, he would make the news again after physically assaulting that same grandmother after being denied fried chicken wings. 2008, Latarian on Judge Judy? Have you ever seen Judge Judy? Have you ever noticed how often family members are suing one another on that show? Well, later in 2008, that show's producers encouraged Latarian's grandmother to sue her daughter for allowing Latarian to take the keys to her SUV and go on that joyride. That actually answers a question that we had before about the whereabouts of his parents. Apparently, Latarian's mother was right there at the time of the incident. Anyway, what we're going to see is something completely disturbing, at least to me, starting with this Judge Judy program. The producers of Judge Judy saw this sensational story of this child and thought it would be a good idea to have Latarian Milton meet Judith Sheindlin, because apparently that would make for some great TV. Now, I've watched a lot of Judge Judy, and from what I understand, based on what she says about herself, she was a family court judge, and she dealt with children all the time. If Latarian's family showed up for this show, there was a good chance that Judith Sheindlin was going to end up giving Latarian's mother the tongue lashing that reasonable and responsible people would want to give her, including her own mother, according to this clip.
hoping to teach her responsibility.
So she's heard it from everybody but Judge Judy. Maybe something Judge Judy could say. I don't know.
So, the mother of Latarian Milton, as told by his grandmother, was an incorrigible child that created one of her own, Latarian, and this probably and statistically against all good judgment. 2010, Tosh.0. Production company Viacom, owners of MTV, VH1, Nickelodeon, and Comedy Central, invited Latarian and his grandmother to California. The further exploitation of this child would actually be continued on Comedy Central's Tosh.0 program. Here, shock comedian Tosh, whatever his name is, says the thing that we've all been thinking about Latarian.
Did you get in trouble later?
No.
You didn't get in trouble?
No.
Yes, you did.
No, I did.
You better have gotten in trouble. This is insanity. Did you get spankings growing up?
No.
I used to get spankings. People don't do that as much anymore.
Only to have sequences where Tosh and Latarian complete staged hood rat activities, in a callback to one of the shocking statements that Latarian made during his infamous 2008 interview. As always, local news media was there to get another laugh out of the kid's life, quick to remind you of how his infamy started. 2015, Latarian graduates middle school at age 15. With the first 15 minutes of his infamy milked dry, Latarian makes the news again, but this time it's about his graduation. Latarian has made the news through positivity. Of course, that didn't stop the local news from bringing up what made him famous in the first place. Yet again. After the affiliate rolled out the 8-year-old stock footage of the joyride, this news story lets us know that now 15-year-old Latarian was graduating middle school. According to that news report, he had dreams of playing football and joining the Navy. One of those things he could do with his still and worsening excessive weight. Neither of those things he could do without any discipline. Now, if you're thinking that it doesn't look good for Latarian, you would be right, because 2017. 17-year-old Latarian Milton is charged as an adult and convicted of a robbery and carjacking of a Lyft driver that he completed with 3 friends. Though it is unclear whether or not Latarian actually used it himself, there was a firearm involved in that incident. So in summary, we have a fatherless young man with an ineffective mother who couldn't be handled by his grandmother, that has no respect for authority, who was exploited like a circus act by no less than 2 Hollywood productions, to say nothing of local news media, who had failed at least 1 school year, who may or may not have been talented enough but definitely was not disciplined enough to either play football or join the military, alive and breathing and needing to make a way in this life in this country. Eventually, that person would find a firearm. Do not be deceived. We will never get the society we want, or even the society 40 years ago, addressing the symptoms in that timeline backwards. The same news media that exploited this child's story now pushes the narrative that making sure the Latarian Miltons of the world can't get their hands on a firearm is the answer. That is a lie. Not convinced? Let's go back one more point on that timeline and talk about the positive influence that team sports can do for a young man. And they can. But do we really want late night basketball programs in gang infested inner cities to be the front line of this problem? Do we really want a young man's first voice of authority to be an armed forces drill instructor? Let's go back one more point. Let's talk about school. Latarian was in grade school during George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind. I'm just going to leave that there. When is the media going to talk about our unprincipled, characterless, for-profit culture creating citizens that feel no connection to not just the country, but their own communities? I'm going to remind everybody that the Uvalde, Texas assailant was one of their own in that community. Judge Judy and Tosh.0, they were willing to pay money to get a sensational episode out of this boy and his family, not help him. Even the ridiculous Dr. Phil reportedly tries to put people in touch with mental health professionals, and we know he's not above exploiting troubled, fatherless Gen Zers from Florida. Now, some of you are out there saying, Look, we still have to do something about these weapons, especially specific firearms. You know the one I'm talking about. Odium, are you saying that we shouldn't do anything about these firearms? All right, let me explain with this graphic. Think of it like a pasta colander or a coffee filter. Working from the assumption that people are inherently and naturally self-seeking, a filter of gun control laws should not be our society's first line of defense. No, first they need to fall into the filter of a steady home life, two-parent households. There, they are taught the basics of unnatural and culturally derived concepts like honor, duty, and integrity that we used to take for granted. And we took those things for granted because we didn't realize that they were unnatural and culturally derived. No one is born honorable and with integrity. We have to be taught that as children because left to our own devices, we will be self-serving. The next filter is education. The failures of our educational system really deserves its own video, so for the sake of this thought experiment, let's just assume school is good. Anyway, along with reading, writing, and arithmetic, there are also skills learned to successfully build relationships and solve conflict in such a way that after the conflict is resolved, you still have a community. You still have a class, you still have a ball team. Nowadays, when people deal with conflict, they either avoid it or wreck the situation so badly that the community in question doesn't even exist anymore. Because of his actions, the team is disqualified. The fantasy football group is broken up because they couldn't resolve a dispute. She cheated on her boyfriend and she ignores his texts because she can't face him now. How many of us out there can't even talk to members of our own family anymore? There are other filters, but when it's all said and done, laws concerning firearms should only be there to catch the smallest, most extreme neuroatypical cases that made it through all those other social and cultural checkpoints. It should not be this wide safety net that people put their faith in. Recently, I've had a respected friend of mine talk about the data that supports how firearm laws can help a society. Okay. I would argue that the statistics surrounding two-parent homes and high school diplomas are more impressive and more effective. In that vein, the historical irony here is that for as hard as it has been to pass legislation dealing with firearms, it's actually the comparatively easier way out. I do think that some legislation will solve a type of problem, but it doesn't even begin to solve the problem. So I personally will no longer devote any of my time backing solutions that attack the symptoms of American bad actors from late in their timeline, working backwards. From now on, I only want to address issues of character and principle transmitted through our culture. Integrity, duty, honor, sacrifice. It's the foundation of all the changes that we say we want and need. It's why people used to say you can't legislate morality. It's why humankind ponders philosophy and created religions. Ancient peoples observed with their own eyes that we couldn't get along with each other without these concepts. And now we've proven it again. I'm Odium. This has been Message in a Bottle. Come back for the next reflection.
Today, and many of the people there told us they just want to live their life without fear. At the corner of Edmondson Avenue and North Franklintown Road, police and a K-9 unit were some of the only signs that someone was murdered here on Wednesday.
It's everywhere. It's crazy. It's just they got to control these guns.
On a block that's experienced this sort of violence before, it would appear